Chapter 15. I Get Pissed, goddammit. I'm in Pittsfield tonight. I go from there to Lexington and then to Winston-Salem for the tour nights. This weekend I'll be in Fort Myers and Corpus Christi. Then on to Pensacola, Birmingham, Raleigh. Work at full bore. Pressure. Pressure. Death and the taxman looking over your shoulder makes life, well, different. There was growing aggressiveness, a new confidence and coherence, and urgency. I didn't have the luxury of sitting around smoking dope and thinking, boy, that was close. I had to get on with my life. My mother had drilled into my head how I always took the path of least resistance, looked for the easy way out. My new resolve was a way of saying, I'm not like you thought, Mary. I have family. I have let them down. I have to rectify that. It's the manly thing to do. Throughout the 80s, I had outbursts of anger. It kept building up and festering. Anger at myself for getting myself in this tax mess, for being such a cokehead I didn't have the sense to avoid the tax mess. Anger at myself for not getting Brenda help sooner. And for the damage we did to Kelly. But good stuff came from that anger. Gradually I learned to channel it where it really belonged, fueling the new voice that had made those brief appearances at Carnegie, a voice that slowly grew sharper, stronger, populating my whole personality, more authentically me, more authoritative. All this can be linked to the confidence that came from being hooked up with Jerry. I was realizing that I hadn't just got a manager for Jerry's incredibly generous percentage. I also got an agent, a promoter, a road manager, a business advisor, and financial backer. And, as I've said, a best friend, a kindred spirit whose mind worked along the same diseased lines as mine, who I could riff and free associate with during the long road trips and wee hours in dreary motels. Over the years, Jerry's sown the seeds of some of my best pieces. Having such confidence in him, I could turn my attention internally to my work, concentrate on how I expressed myself, how I could entertain them, make them like me, all the elements that make up what I do. When uncertainty and unreliability and financial pressure eat up a large percentage of your energy, it's impossible to pay attention to that. And when it's relieved, all that energy is now yours. Hams's presence is so much larger than just a sentence that says, and then I met Jerry. The financial pressure was huge. The tax bill was gigantic and always growing. Jerry shielded me from the worst implications of all of this, but sometimes he would have to tell me. They found another $525,000. They're looking at 1977 now, as well as 78 and 79. Then we'd have to bite the bullet and get a loan, or increase the mortgage, or get a second mortgage. Sometimes the tax man wanted money faster than I could make it. Jerry was a rock. Twice in the 80s, he reached into his own pocket and loaned me over $1 million. Brenda always said that I was being singled out because of what I did and said on stage. She was convinced the tax man was really saying, shut the fuck up or suffer. I don't know if it was true, but I loved her for thinking of it. She had a great line about the whole affair. Despite everything I said about the government, like not trusting anything they told me, I went out every night and worked for them. Abraham Maslow said that the fully realized person transcends his local group and identifies with the species. But the election of Ronald Reagan might have been the beginning of my giving up on my species, because it was absurd. To this day, it remains absurd. More than absurd, it was frightening. It represented the rise to supremacy of darkness, the ascendancy of ignorance. All through the 80s, I had a visceral reaction to those who supported him, especially on planes. I lost count of how many times I sat up in first class with all these business suits, feeling a great welling anger in my gut. Livid at the conversations of these cocksuckers with their smug body language, their little leather briefcases, their neatly folded Wall Street journals, their aura of being in charge, running the show. I knew they were totally happy about what happened and that they were in a position to gloat. It hastened new directions for me. The osmosis from the prevailing political climate is very real in a person like myself. And so, all through those Reagan years, another process accelerated. Along with finding my authentic voice, I was finding an authentic position to speak from. A decade earlier, when I'd done my gold albums, I didn't have any synthesized sets of feelings or information about politics. Beyond a few one-liners about racism or Vietnam, I had no coherent point of view. It was more a question of, let's just get high. Yeah, man, I'm against this and I'm against that, but who the fuck knows why? I was very unsophisticated. I certainly couldn't back up what political positions I had or argue them with any weight. I didn't have a political self. Yes, I'd thrown off the phony media me, rediscovered the authentic rebel child and clown, rejoined my own history, dug out my personal truth from misguided ambitions. All good. But after a certain point, I'd discovered that not much remained to be rediscovered. I'd exhausted my personal history, right down to snot as rubber cement, and my old toenails. I'd never considered or explored the creative process in terms of the tension between the internal me and the external political environment. But now I could and would. Death continued to keep an eye on the Carlin household. This time it was Brenda's turn. When we did Carlin at Carnegie in 1982, she'd found a little lump on her breast, but it was just a cyst, so she let it go. After she finished editing, it took 4 months because we didn't have the safety show, she went in for a checkup and the doctor looked at it and said, yeah, it was a cyst, but he didn't want to aspirate it because of the implants she'd got in the 70s. So she went in for minor surgery, and when she woke up, there were 3 doctors standing over her bed. Under the cyst, they'd found a tumor that no mammogram had shown. Luckily, it hadn't spread to the lymph nodes, but her options were either radiation and chemo or a modified mastectomy, taking a wedge of the breast out with the tumor. They gave her 48 hours to decide. This was a rock and a hard place. After she got sober, she was diagnosed with chronic active hepatitis, now called hepatitis C. 9 years later, she still had the hepatitis C, so chemo and radiation weren't much of an option. They'd probably kill her. But a mastectomy, she was only 44. We called 3 different surgeons and asked them, what would you tell your wife to do? They all said get it out. So she had a modified mastectomy. And it worked. Given that her mother died of breast cancer, Brenda obsessed about reliving that history, that she wouldn't make it past 50, which was the age her mother died. But she did. In 1985, she had reconstructive surgery, and that was a good move, too. The surgeon was Stephen Hoffman, the one who did Michael Jackson. But once you've had cancer, you're always in the waiting room, and every time she went in for a mammogram, she felt death was looking over her shoulder. We kept Brenda for many more years, but we did lose Mary. In the early 80s, I'd relented about her banishment to New York. She came back to California, and I set her up in Santa Monica at an assisted living place called the Georgian Hotel. It was a quiet place and a quiet neighborhood, overlooking the ocean, but she still had some tart comments left in her. She was in her mid-80s by now, and a steady stream of complaints about how I ignored her and never had time for her. Same old Mary. She really did have a good heart. She just made it so goddamn difficult to love her. In late '83, she had a massive stroke that left her non-ambulatory, and we moved her to a more full-service assisted living place across from St. John's. She declined pretty quickly and died in June of 1984 at the age of 88. Then it was my turn. I had one angioplasty early in the decade, and in '86 I had to get a second one. I wasn't too worried. It's not invasive, and I'd been through it before. But Brenda was tense and turned out to be right. During the procedure, the wire went into the wrong artery, and there was damage to the blood vessel. We ended up going to San Francisco for this wonderful variant of angioplasty called the kissing balloon technique. And that was angioplasty number 2, and by no means the last. I began to do something about my political ignorance. I subscribed to publications like Anarchy Magazine, Mother Jones, In These Times, The Nation. I read a lot of sociology and social history. I sought out the most radical parts of the Village Voice, which I'd always kept a subscription to because I liked the New York edge. I knew I'd always find someone really far left. Not just Village Voice left, but someone really wailing, like Alexander Cockburn. I discovered Noam Chomsky, Hunter Thompson, Gore Vidal, writers who said things in a daring manner, truly dissenting voices. I had a left-wing, humanitarian, secular humanist liberal inclination on the one hand, which implied positions on myriad issues. On the other, I had prejudices and angers and hatreds toward various classes of people, none of which included skin color or ethnicity or religion. Well, religion, yes. I used to get angry at blue-collar right-wingers, but that passed because I saw that in the end they were just a different sort of victim. I felt discomfort at having received positions on issues simply because of my preference for the left of center, for people's rights over property rights. I was beginning to find that a lot of my positions clashed. The habits of liberals, their automatic language, their knee-jerk responses to certain issues, deserved the epithets the right wing stuck them with. I'd see how true they often were. Here they were, banding together in packs so that I could predict what they were going to say about some event or conflict, and it wasn't even out of their mouths yet. I was very uncomfortable with that. Liberal orthodoxy was as repugnant to me as conservative orthodoxy. I hosted SNL for a second time in '84. I like to do it every 9 years. For some reason, Lorne didn't call in '93 or 2002. I'll give him one more chance in 2011. This time, unlike the first, I was determined to do sketches because my acting ambitions had been relit. I felt confident and different enough about who I was by then. I did 3 sketches, and I have to say I was really good. Then I got a role in Outrageous Fortune with Bette Midler and Shelley Long, which turned out to be a hit. Making Outrageous Fortune was the kind of belonging I'd always longed for, like being at camp with good friends, and there's this ashtray you're all making together. I played, of course, a burned-out hippie who's an alcoholic and lives on an Indian reservation and hustles tourists. The part's not huge, but the impact is great because, in a way, he's the hero. He saves the whole situation they get into. It led to Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure a couple of years later, and then a good role in Prince of Tides, and more recently, Dogma and Jersey Girl with Kevin Smith. I've always had that same feeling of belonging, working with friends and enjoying the counterpunching with them, a dream that, in a nice little way, actually came true, even if I never did become Jack Lemmon II. My new direction was slowly making itself known to me by the reading I was choosing and the things I was tearing out and circling in periodicals. I was beginning to keep what amounted to a journal in another form, a record of my reactions to issues. Every day I take a lot of notes, and the notes go into files in various categories. They can be a sentence, a word, an idea, two things that connect or contrast, an afterthought, a neat phrase, something I can add to something in a given file. Maybe these go together. Maybe it could start like this, or something that starts an entirely new file. It's an incessant process. What often happens with these notes is that there's a period of months when they tend in a certain direction or they're about certain topics. I don't review them that often, but I add to them all the time. So when I finally take time to look them over, I get a kind of objective view of what my mind really wants to produce. In the mid-'80s, the notes began to be almost exclusively about issues: capital punishment, rich and poor, abortion, government corruption, official euphemisms, the crimes of those business suits I sat next to on planes. The number of notes about department stores or dogs and cats or driving habits or airlines began to diminish. Those files were fairly fat anyway. My mind and heart said, this is what we're doing now. And it would be new, a new direction, a new sound. My writing was getting more disciplined. I was more consciously crafting language and structure. I had that constant laboratory of performance to test things, to strip away what wasn't needed or didn't work. I was taking the first tentative steps toward comedy as art. The 1986 HBO show, Playing With Your Head, has a piece called Love and Regards, which in a way is an outgrowth of Stuff, narrowly focusing on one word or phrase, treating the trivial as a matter of great significance. The piece is about the implications of trivial phrases, like, give my love to so-and-so, all in the form of almost legalistic questions. Think of the awesome responsibility of carrying one person's love to another person. If you don't encounter that person, can you unburden yourself of the love by giving it to someone else? What form should the actual delivery of the love take? Whether or not the person is the intended recipient. Can you tongue kiss them? What if they're gay? It was more an exercise in form than a piece with a particular point. But my mind was beginning to work differently. With my first transformation, it was exciting just to speak to my audience one-on-one instead of performing impersonally in front of them. To confide in them who the internal me really was, share insights with them, be their friend. Now I was driven by a different need to convey things about the external world, or my version of it, lead them logically or apparently logically to conclude that my version was correct, take them step by step to the place I wanted them to be. My overall reaction to the Reagan years was one of storing up ammunition, arming myself and storing the armaments away for use later on. I knew this was happening because I could see the files taking shape, acquiring real structure, meaning, and weight. And they were getting fatter and fatter. Before long, I was going to be able to back up the things I really wanted to say, the positions I wanted to take. I knew now what I was for and against, and I knew why. The 1988 HBO show, What Am I Doing in New Jersey, was the first use of the stored armaments, the first time that the newfound attention to structure met up with a heightened political sense. I'm the first to say it's a great country, but it's a strange culture. This has got to be the only country in the world that could come up with a disease like bulimia. where some people have no food at all, and some people eat a nourishing meal and then puke it up. Intentionally. Where tobacco kills 400,000 people a year, but they ban artificial sweeteners because a rat died. And now they're thinking of banning toy guns, but they're keeping the real fucking ones. It's the old American double standard. And of course, we're founded on the double standard. That's our history. This country was founded by slave owners who wanted to be free. So they killed a lot of English white people in order to continue owning their black African people so they could kill the red Indian people and move west to steal the rest of the land from the brown Mexican people, giving them a place for their planes to take off and drop nuclear weapons on the yellow Japanese people. You know what the motto of this country ought to be? You give us a color, we'll wipe it out. You've got to be even-handed, though. Nothing like road rage for injecting a little populist class warfare. Baby on board. Child in car. Don't tell me your troubles, lady. Why don't you put up an honest sign? Asshole at the wheel. They don't sell many of those, do they? Nah, they give them away free with Volvos and Audis and Saabs. Some of these morons have Saabs. We bought a Saab. Well, what did you buy a Swedish piece of shit like that for? It's a safe car. Some of these people think that by buying a safe car, it excuses them the responsibility of actually having to learn to drive the fucking thing. First you learn to drive. Then you buy your safe car. Well, I get pissed. God damn it.